Welcome, everybody. I'm Daniel Ziblatt, the director of the Center for European Studies, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's session, Limit Speech, Protect Democracy, ? That's not a statement, that's a question mark. Freedom of speech in Germany and the United States. So it's really great to see all of you here today. The topic is certainly timely. Not only is freedom of speech under attack across the Atlantic, but it's also become a political football as opponents accuse each other of limiting free speech and attacking democracy. In February, of course, of this year, maybe we'll hear something more about this today, the US Vice President, while in Germany, criticized Germany's longstanding legal framework of limiting anti-constitutional speech that condones violence and so on. This criticism provoked a firestorm in Germany and in the United States. And Europeans and Americans look to the United States and see attacks on freedom of speech in the United States as well. In particular, one thing people point to is the consolidation of the media landscape in the United States over the last year as a possible restriction on freedom of speech. So given all of this context, we're very lucky today to hear from Melanie Amann, a John F. Kennedy Memorial Policy Fellow here at the Center for European Studies. She's here for the month of October. She's really uniquely positioned, I would say, to address a lot of these issues and give us insight on these issues, and particularly in the German-American context. So Melanie Amann has served as deputy editor of Der Spiegel, one of Europe's largest weekly magazines, since 2023. Since September 2025, she's now distinguished author at Der Spiegel. She joined the publication back in 2013 and became head of the Berlin office in 2019. Thinking that's probably when I first met you. I think we had lunch right around then in Berlin, before being appointed to the editorial board in 2021. Before that, she worked at many different publications, the Financial Times, Deutschland, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung. Amann studied law in Trier and France and Berlin and earned her doctorate at Ludwig-Maximilian University in Munich. In 2003 to 2004, she spent a year at the German School of Journalism. Now in 2026, after she's here, she'll be returning back to Germany and join the Funke Media Group, a network of regional newspapers in Germany, as editor-in-chief for Federal News and Digital Strategy. So while here, she's been, as I said, a Kennedy Memorial Policy Fellow, and will be appearing, I think, next week as well at another event. So if you want to hear more, you can come next week. Next Tuesday, I believe. Is that right? And is that taking place here?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so, with some Nieman fellow journalists. So let me just say a word about the fellowship that's sponsoring the visit, because while we're, of course, primarily an academic institution, the visit of practitioners to our center enriches the life here for all of us, short-term visits. And so in addition to Melanie Amann, this fellowship has been held in recent years by the former Prime Minister of Greece, Alexis Tsipras. That was actually last in the spring. A journalist and director of the German Council on Foreign Relations, Thomas Kleiner-Brockhoff, the German climate activist, Luisa Neubauer, and former federal minister for foreign affairs and leader of the Social Democratic Party, Sigmar Gabriel. So an illustrious crew of people. Melanie, it's been great having you here this month. We've gotten a lot out of it. I hope you have as well. And so she will speak for about 30 minutes. Is that about right?
I hope
so. Then we'll
yeah.
have a conversation, and then we'll open it up for the public. So please join me in welcoming Melanie Amann.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Yes.
It's been a wonderful 3 weeks already, 2 more weeks. I must say I'm very sad I can't stay longer, and I've been enjoying it really thoroughly. I'm very grateful for CES for the opportunity to be here at Harvard and to engage with so many interesting, fascinating people and to learn more about the reality of freedom of speech in this country and to compare it with the situation in my country. And freedom of speech is a topic that interests me as a lawyer not by profession, but by education. And it concerns me as a journalist, of course. It's basically the foundation of my professional freedom, of my professional life. And it's both in Germany and the US a core fundamental right. And where we're living at a time, as Daniel already pointed out, where let's say, the perception and the reality of the safeguarding of this fundamental right can be very different according to who you talk to and what your personal experience is. So I'm going to try to elaborate on the framework that we have in Germany, maybe show you some good and bad cases, and debunk some myths that float around freedom of speech in Germany especially. So early in 2025, the American public was introduced to 3 very scary specimens, German prosecutors, in a documentary for the CBS show 60 Minutes. Sorry, is that yours? Free speech by phone. So CBS showed a documentary on the work of German prosecutors enforcing our rules against hate speech, and with measures including raids of suspects' homes and the confiscation of their phones. And they gleefully described how shocked some people reacted when these measures were taken against them. Like, isn't there freedom of speech in Germany? And the prosecutors seemed really amused while describing these suspects' reactions. They are shocked, they said. It's worse than paying a fine. This video did a lot of damage, as you can imagine, to Germany's image, and not only abroad, but also at home. The German public, parts of the German public were also outraged about this. And the discussion started, is there censorship happening? Are German prosecutors persecuting citizens voicing critical opinions? So the report was even noted at the top of the US government. Vice President J.D. Vance posted this comment on X. I don't know if you guys can read it, but basically he warned the German government. Insulting someone is not a crime. Criminalizing speech is going to put a real strain on European and US relationships. And just a few days earlier, as most of you said, and as Daniel had mentioned, Vance had spoken at the 2025 Munich Security Conference and had warned Germany and Europe of violating freedom of speech and endangering democracy. Many politicians told me afterwards what Daniel already mentioned, how offended they were by this criticism. And to German ears, they were really painful. Except maybe for our right-wing party AfD, whose representatives jumped on these comments, applauding and thanking the vice president. And Vance had confirmed the suspicion of their party base that Germany has for a long time been turning into a Meinungsdiktatur, a dictatorship of the left, opinion dictatorship. And Vance and the AfD both promised that under their rule, under a President Trump or an AfD government, freedom of speech would always be safeguarded. So you can imagine my confusion when a few months later, I was told that my US visa depended on a previous social media check of my accounts. And I was asked to unlock my accounts should they be set to private. And I was equally surprised when last week the State Department revoked half a dozen visa for foreigners, including a German journalist, because of indeed hateful and despicable posts about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But still, isn't that freedom of speech? Yeah, so really, how bad is it in Germany? Well, as for Germany, I don't know. We don't know. We don't have any nationwide data on the number of hate crimes committed. There's a lack of data about the extent of hate speech, no nationwide reporting concerning the number of measures taken by prosecutors, no national statistics on convictions. So if you ask random Germans about the state of freedom of speech in our country, you will get very different and very personal answers. As for my answer, I can give you a very brand new example that was just posted today by AfD politician Björn Höcke. He declared journalists like myself and a few of my colleagues, he named me explicitly as parasites. Parasitic journalism and slander against the AfD. And in general, I mean, I only exchanged this slide today, but I originally posted a few comments from X and from Instagram with the nice messages people have been posting there about me. My impression is the haters are doing fine. It's quite the opposite of an opinion dictatorship, but like I said, it's a personal impression. So maybe we should take a look at the rules. What is the framework against online hate speech? And I'll be very happy to discuss the weaknesses of our system with you and draw comparisons to the situation in the US later. Well, since the Second World War, freedom of speech is rooted in the German Constitution, and it's Article 5. It proclaims the right to freely express and disseminate your opinion in speech, writing, and pictures, and there shall be no censorship. But from the start, this freedom came with limits. These rights shall find their limits, Article 5 provides, in the provisions of general laws and, I abbreviate here, in the right to personal honor. The provisions of general laws, that's quite a broad term. It basically means that the shape of this very basic human right, freedom of speech, is not defined by the Constitution itself, but by simple laws of Parliament, which can be changed by a simple majority in Parliament. An important example is Section 130 of our criminal code, prohibiting the incitement to hatred, Volksverhetzung, especially by spreading Nazi propaganda, using Nazi symbols like the swastika, or to deny the Holocaust. The legislation has been tightened in 2022. It has been expanded to the denial, condoning, and trivialization of war crimes and genocide. Obviously, because it happened because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so now, in principle, somebody who denies war crimes committed by Russian soldiers in Ukraine can theoretically be punished with up to 3 years in prison. But this change is ultimately based on an EU directive. So you see, when you come to Europe, you have all kinds of intertwining levels of legislation, European and German, and within Germany, of course, the federal system, Bund and Länder, so it can be quite complicated to keep track of what the rules are. The second important limit regarding our conversation today is the right to personal honor. So the German criminal code prohibits insults and defamation. They're not regarded as free opinions. So actually that's a rule from before the Nazi era even. So freedom of speech allows you to publicly lie as long as you don't insult anyone with this lie or commit slander against other citizens. And that punishment can even be harsher if you verbally attack a politician. Politicians are specifically protected under the German criminal law. So that's maybe to you that seems like a weird or paradoxical idea of freedom. I mean, taking tough action against the expression of opinions in order to protect the freedom of opinion. I mean, yes, it is a bit of a paradox, but in my opinion, it's basically justified. Unlike the US, the legal tradition in Germany sets limits to freedom of speech with the goal of ensuring a civilized discourse and to safeguard public peace. I mean, it's a very honorable goal. The idea is that insults and slander put democratic discourse at risk. They intimidate and scare people away from engaging in political dialogue. And there's a very sad example proving that point. In 2019, CDU politician Walter Lübcke, the gentleman you see in this picture here, was shot on his porch in Hessen on a mild summer evening. The killer was a right-wing extremist who had attended an event with Lübcke where he defended Angela Merkel's refugee policy. And video snippets of the event had gone viral in social media, showing Lübcke saying, "It's worth living in our country. You have to stand up for your values. Anyone who doesn't support these values can leave this country at any time if they disagree." The invitation to leave the country if you disagree with Merkel, this statement fueled the rage, especially in the AfD community. Lübcke was only exercising his freedom of speech, but he paid for it with his life. And the interesting or tragic thing is that his killer was at the event, but as the investigation showed later, it was much later, after countless hateful social media posts, that he got riled up to actually commit the deed and set out to murder him. So it is quite certain that he was encouraged by the massive online hate that he saw in social media. So since Lübke's assassination, the laws protecting the reputations of politicians have been tightened. Attacking them verbally can be punished much harder than attacks on private individuals. So although politicians have to be thick-skinned to a certain extent, as the Bundesverfassungsgericht pointed out, they deserve extra protection. Because hate crime might destabilize democracy, because people might be scared off of entering politics. Does that work? I'm skeptical. So what can you still say in Germany? I chose a few examples to illustrate the boundaries of free speech in a legal and social context. The first and second examples are meant to show that the German political discourse is not exactly dominated by political correctness. Volker Kauder, Merkel's right-hand man in parliament, was criticized by the then Minister for Family Affairs, and he told her to quit whining and get the draft law that was expected of her on the road, so to say. And I remember my now husband, who's American, who said he would be out of a job in the US. And in Germany, I mean, there was a fair amount of criticism against him, but you can tell another politician, a woman, to quit whining, and nobody really cares. Friedrich Merz called primary school boys of Arabic origin little pashas, all of them, not differentiating, but generalizing. It sounds a bit like a racist stereotype to me, but then that's just my personal opinion. And he also experienced political backlash, but nothing really serious. And the third picture shows, and those are obviously both perfectly legal opinions to be voiced. The third picture shows a German comedian who made fun of Alice Weidel on his show. She had demanded that political correctness be put, as she said, be thrown in the trash can of history. And as you can see, he sent the joke right back at her, saying, "Enough with political correctness, let's all be incorrect. The Nazi bitch is right." Alice Weidel pressed charges and lost. The court deemed the statement a legitimate satire. Of course, anyone calling Alice Weidel a Nazi bitch out of that satirical context might be punishable, or would be punishable, certainly. The fourth example is Weidel herself, who spoke in parliament of girls in headscarves, Kopftuchmädchen, thugs with knives on welfare support, and other good-for-nothings, and how damaging they were to our prosperity. And according to the German constitution, this is why I picked this example, politicians, the freedom of speech for politicians has a wider margin than that of, let's say, normal people like us. They can only be prosecuted for a very narrow number of, a very small number of, for example, slanderous insults against other people. But racism, sexism, the incitement of hatred against religious groups or social groups, they go unpunished. They cannot be persecuted for this. And finally, there's the case of Renate Künast, a Green politician. She doesn't really match this selection here because she's a victim. She was a victim of online hate after she had spoken out about child marriages in Germany and how they should not be completely forbidden because maybe children coming from Afghanistan or Syria, maybe there were reasons where they wanted to stay in a marriage even though they were minors. And she got a lot of online hatred. And she was called, well, you can see what she was called. And the Landgericht Berlin said, those are legitimate political opinions as long as they're in a factual context. The Bundesgerichtshof overruled this verdict, and I think her example shows two things. One, there are no clear legal rules that separate hate speech from free speech. It's very hard, even for lawyers, to predict which utterances are still within the margin of the law and which opinions might be illegal. And the other thing is that, to me, in the end, the court system is still quite reliable. Even you may have a bizarre or wrong verdict in the first round, or you may have disproportionate measures by prosecutors, but eventually, from my impression, the checks and balances work, and the social repercussions against an opinion might be much harder than the legal repercussions. obvious things to avoid saying in Germany. To me, it seems quite simple. Just try not to share pics to social media with any Nazi propaganda or Nazi pictures. This picture shows a German Wehrmacht soldier with a machine gun, the fastest asylum procedure in the world. It can reject up to 1,400 cases per minute. And so pictures like this are still quite popular in AfD circles. They try to limit them to their chat groups, but as you saw with the Young Republicans in Politico, these chat groups eventually always get leaked to the public, and yeah. But still, some people don't seem to get it. I mean, you should think that every adult German with a minimal historic and legal knowledge, or simply a reliable gut feeling, might be aware of the limits of free speech in Germany. But even an occasional history teacher in the AfD, like Björn Höcke, claims he did not know that you must not use the SA slogan "Alles für Deutschland," all for Germany. And he was convicted to a hefty fine for using that slogan. And there are more difficult cases. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine and since the Hamas massacre of October 7th, the law of incitement to hate suddenly had a broad new range of cases, especially regarding pro-Palestinian demonstrations. So as a result of the Hamas attack, the German Federal Minister of the Interior had banned Hamas in Germany on November 2nd. And on that occasion, they also banned the slogan "From the river to the sea" in all languages to be uttered in Germany because it was a symbol of Hamas, they said, the federal ministry said. But the criminal liability of this slogan as a symbol of an unconstitutional and terrorist organization is assessed very differently by the authorities and the courts in the different federal states. So it very much depended on where you protested the Gaza war in Germany. In Bremen or in NRW, you might be forbidden to chant "From the river to the sea." And in Bavaria or in Hessen, you might be okay as long as you don't wave a Hamas flag, or as long as you don't combine the slogan with a pro-Hamas chant. So this is one of the legal absurdities regarding our rules of free speech, because thanks to our federal system, nobody can really be sure what's allowed. It also puts a lot of pressure on security services, obviously, the police. And there's one case that caught my eye when preparing for this lecture today. Earlier this year, our Berlin Interior Senator Iris Spranger decided to expel 4 students from Germany, non-German students, even though they had EU passports, meaning they basically had the right to freely move within the borders of the EU. But the Interior Senator claimed that the 4 had participated in pro-Palestinian protests and broken the law. They had allegedly forced their way into the premises of Free University of Berlin, armed with pickaxes, and had threatened students and professors and destroyed classrooms. But these allegations committing violence and destroying property are quite grave, but they were never convicted of these allegations. And some allegations were minor, like calling a police officer a fascist or chanting "From the river to the sea." So I was unable to find out what happened since, but I'm quite certain that the courts will overrule this decision. The cases are still pending, from what I read. So there was a public outcry, not only in the media, but also in the legal and human rights community, and strong criticism from other politicians, even from the senator's own party. So once again, these mistakes happen, and they can be grave for the individual. And hopefully, in the end, the system of checks and balances works, and these cases are overruled. As for the question of personal honor and free speech, the German legal system had it quite easy for a while. They only had to weigh in on cases like, are you allowed to say old soldiers are murderers? A Tucholsky quote. And yes, they allowed it. Or could you compare a TV anchor with a milked-out goat? No, you cannot do that. So the internet and social media obviously brought on much bigger challenges. So what if somebody calls you a milked-out goat online? And what if it wasn't somebody you knew, but an anonymous user with, I don't know, the handle @goathater, XYZ, and you had no idea who it was? So the laws against insults and defamation are the same, no matter where the deed is committed, in the real world or online. But enforcing the rules in the digital world has proven to be really difficult. And in 2017, Germany created the Network Enforcement Act, Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz, that obliged social networks with more than 2 million users to delete illegal posts within 24 hours. Remember, what's illegal, we don't really know. And to provide prosecutors with the personal data of suspects. The fines for violations were hefty, but I was a legal reporter at the time, and I visited the Bundesamt für Justiz, the government body charged with overseeing this law, and I realized that the likes of Twitter and Facebook didn't have much to fear from the 17 employees that were charged with enforcing this law. This photo is an original picture that one of our photographers took back then of a shelf in the office of Bundesamt für Justiz. You can see that the task force spent their days printing out offenses and making phone calls from landlines. So this is the Neuland that they were entering. So the NetzDG has since been replaced by a similar European legislation based on the Digital Services Act. And since the assassination of Walter Lübcke, the rules have been tightened once more. Big tech companies are now not only obliged to delete posts inciting hatred or threatening people with murder, but they have to proactively alert the Bundeskriminalamt. They're not doing this, I can tell you. My colleagues have reported about it at Spiegel extensively. The BKA, or basically our equivalent to the FBI, similar to the FBI, is quite helpless. Has to find other ways. So many German states have also created task forces and they rely on social media, on non-profit institutions, media supervisory bodies, trusted flaggers, as they call it, to find online hatred and to pursue online hatred. Of course, AfD is attacking these institutions as left-wing ideologists and a private internet Stasi. And indeed, sometimes things go wrong when prosecuting online hate. The laws are very strict, as I said, and they can have unfortunate side effects, which brings us back to our prosecutor friends from the beginning. Some of them are overzealous, especially when leading politicians are the victims of online hate. Like I said before, the laws like Section 188 of our Penal Code contain severe sanctions for insults or malicious gossip that is directed against a person involved in the political life of the nation. So it means that politicians are especially protected against hate speech, and punishment is much graver. The penalty is imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years or a fine. So yes, in my view, it's a useless and problematic law. It's important to protect politicians' personal rights, no doubt, but they can just be protected like everybody else. In many cases tried on the basis of this law have triggered a sense of uncertainty and outrage in the public. One example is the case concerning the Hamburg Interior Senator that even caught the attention of Bill Maher over here. This politician, and Andi Grote, had been called a Pimmel online. I'll let you find the translation on ChatGPT. It's a rather mild slur. It's more like on primary school level. Still, the Hamburg police raided the suspect's home to find evidence that he committed this horrible crime. And courts later deemed this a disproportionate measure. Another case concerned our former economy minister, Robert Habeck. A senior citizen from the south of Germany posted a meme about Habeck calling him Schwachkopf, meaning idiot or imbecile. It's an allusion to the German hairstyling product company Schwarzkopf. And Habeck is known for his carefully styled, rugged, out-of-bed look. I'm sure you all know him, what he looks like. And shortly after the post, the man's house was raided, and which greatly upset his disabled grandchild that the man was taking care of. So this investigation got a lot of public attention, and it was even ultimately given up because this guy had been posting much more problematic stuff online, including Nazi imagery. But the raid, and that's what counts, the raid only happened because of his insult against Habeck. So you can't help but wonder, would the prosecutors have gone to search his house because he posted a Nazi meme? Probably not, but they did go because Robert Habeck was the one signing this, the accusation, or put in a claim. And so it was widely considered a disproportionate case. But the most severe verdict regarding free speech, to my knowledge, concerned the publisher of a right-wing rag, I guess you can call it, Deutschland-Kurier. It's a right-wing publication very much in favor of AfD. And this gentleman called David Bendels posted a manipulated photo of our then Interior Minister, Nancy Faeser. You can see that in the bottom. So in the original photo, she held up a sign saying, "We remember." It was in the context of Holocaust Remembrance Day. And the editor changed it to, "I hate freedom of speech." Faeser filed a criminal complaint, and the court found that unbiased readers could not tell that this picture was a montage. They might think that Faeser really hates freedom of speech, thus creating severe damage to her reputation. The defendant got sentenced to a suspended prison sentence of 7 months for slander. A very harsh verdict, in my opinion. It is within the boundaries of the special law protecting politicians, but it shows, is this really a case that you should go to prison for? Of course, Bendels has become a martyr of free speech for the AfD community. And basically the law has become a boomerang for the rule of law, I think, or for freedom of speech, because now people distrust our regulations even more. So to wrap things up, die Freiheit, die wir meinen. Don't know how many German fans here know this famous folk song von Max von Schenkendorf, Freiheit, die ich meine. Anyway, it's from the early 19th century. We have strict laws on paper, and for very good reasons, for noble reasons. But they show weak results in when they're being practiced, and sometimes they have grave side effects for freedom of speech, for the freedom of the individual. German government authorities or the judiciary can be overwhelmed by the cases, by the complexity of cases, by the technical challenges of these, especially online hate speech, and they make bad judgment calls. So there's a sense of uncertainty spreading, not only in right-wing circles. People asking themselves, was darf ich denn noch sagen? Das wird man doch noch sagen dürfen. Am I still allowed to say this? So the main goal to protect public discourse, stabilize public discourse against hate speech, is not only, in my opinion, is not sufficiently protected. And in fact, there's doubt. The legislation the legislation sows doubt into the system. And that's my biggest worry, that our defamation laws become weapons in the hands of populists and extremists. They warn of the dominance of wokeism and left-wing opinion dictatorship, and indeed many Germans feel threatened by this. They fear a regime of soft censorship and unwanted opinions by the media and universities, like Harvard. And they believe it would take a Trump government or Elon Musk as the owner of X for all of Germany to break free. And I still want to end on a positive note. Freedom of speech is by and large safeguarded in Germany, in my opinion. Our justice system is effectively protects free speech, and disproportionate measures by prosecutors and wrong judgments are regularly overruled by the courts. And I know of no legally binding court decision that imposed insanely high fines or even prison sentences, not even for obvious hate speech. So I don't always feel protected in the German system, but I feel safe from arbitrary government infringement. So what about the US? On my first day at Harvard, I listened to a session with the Republican strategist Scott Jennings at Harvard Kennedy School. He stressed that he's very comfortable with the direction of the Republican Party. I quote, "It is the party that, in my opinion, best defends Western civilization, and it has by and large stood up for free speech." Let's just say, I think this statement is worth debating about. Thank you.
so much, Melanie. So I'll start. You can all. I'm sure there's lots of people who have lots of questions, but maybe I'll just get the ball rolling a little bit with a few questions, and then we could open the floor. So if I read your analysis, I mean, if I kind of read through the sort of between the lines, it sounds as if you think, by and large, this is a functioning system, although this kind of criminal code 188 seems to have gone too far. Mm-hmm. But that these constitutional provisions that you cited seem to make sense, and there's a historical reason for why these are there. I guess a question that I have is, why has this become more salient? Or has it become more salient? My impression is that it has. I mean, these cases, and this is a kind of become more contentious and become more problematic and become an issue of political debate. Why has this happened over the last? I mean, is it just the rise of the AfD? Is it the rise of social media? What is it that's driving this?
I think it's a few. There are a few contributing factors. The fact that, like I said at the beginning, it's very personal how you consider freedom of speech. Is it working or not in Germany? And I think there are a lot of people. There are a lot of high-profile cases that caused a very bad impression of the system as such, and people will catch a headline where they think something went wrong, and they don't follow up. And they don't see that maybe in the next level, on the next court level, this case has been decided totally differently. And so the only thing they will remember is, oh, somebody was punished for insulting a member of government, or somebody's house was raided because he or she posted something hateful online. And so there's a sense of insecurity, and at the same time, I'm also worried that even lawyers don't really know what the rules are. And you cannot. I talked to a distinguished fellow at the CES over lunch today, who's an expert on freedom of speech, and who told me, he's sitting here actually, and he told me, I don't know. Like honestly, even I couldn't tell when a case goes to court, is this still is a statement still within the boundaries of the law or not? So I think that makes a legal system bad.
And so, what's the source of the flux, though? I don't understand. Why is this uncertain? I mean, why is this newly uncertain? I mean, is it because of the way that the courts are deciding, or
I think it's what's new is the social media and like the online aspect of it all, and I think that added a hotness to the put the debate up to a degree, a temperature that is unhealthy.
And so, in your work as deputy editor, I mean, was this something that was affecting your work? I mean, do you feel the pinch of this and trying to decide which stories you would run and how certain sentences would be formulated? Or was this something that's active part of your job?
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, less so in writing or in editing. A lot actually in editing. When I edited other people's stories, I often worried, like, will they think that how I've caught myself thinking, like, can this be used against us by the right-wing populists, if we use a certain label for them, if we say the right-wing extremists, should we call them like this? Are we allowed to call them like this?
And so in this, it'd be interesting to understand how this process works. So as you're making these decisions, do you have lawyers on staff that you're running things by? And so when there's questions, you're uncertain, you feel like you need to run this past lawyers in effect.
And they will say, it depends.
Yeah, right, I'm sure. So that puts the burden back on the editors to then make the decision.
And whenever I go on TV, there's always something in the back of my mind, okay, you got to be really careful what you say. And I mean, you saw the post by Björn Höcke, so he posts this kind of thing, and he's quite fearless, I think, he can just put out any slur or insult, but we're trying to be the good guys, so at the level that we try to uphold, it's very hard to, it's easier to stumble for us than for him, is my impression.
So
Somehow the rules seem to be different for him than for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so these things begin, though, if somebody files a lawsuit. I mean, you mentioned the Habeck case. I mean, these are cases when somebody feels as if they've been insulted, then they have to file. That's how it
Yeah, that's the interesting
right?
thing about our system. Insults are not automatically prosecuted by the prosecutors, but you have to file a complaint or you have to press charges, and only then do they become active. So Habeck actually signed a request for the courts for the prosecutors to pursue this case. And that's also what angered many, not only right-wingers, but many people who said, well, why can't he accept that they called him a Schwachkopf? So what? Like,
So-
can't they suck it up?
And so that, I mean, am I understanding it correctly then that the stuff that J.D. Vance in a sense is responding to is the Criminal Code 188, not the constitutional provisions that...
Yeah, or
that-
other regulations in the
Yes.
criminal code. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, interesting. I think that differentiation probably escapes most outside observers. I think this is like the German model of democracy, limits not, the publication of the Mein Kampf and so on. But this is a different matter.
I mean, I don't like saying it, but I mean, he puts up the valid point, like, should freedom of speech be reined in, or should you raid the home of somebody who posted hateful content online? What is the level of the insult that justifies such a measure? I mean, the German constitution also protects the security of your home, and to violate the security of someone's home, it takes a certain amount of aggression that you need to pursue this, and it's not always working. I think the prosecutors are probably insecure themselves, or uncertain, like, is it enough to search the house or is it not? And then they should probably rather hold back than go for it. But the politicians, they have these action days, or the prosecutions in all over Germany have the so-called action days, where they try to, they have like 20 raids at the same time to make a point. Online hate is bad, don't insult your neighbor, we're coming to raid your house. And so it's a kind of the idea to educate people. Of course, they only pick cases where they think it's justified to do this. And they do searches on the same day, but they would do these searches also on different days if they found it justified. But to the public, it's like, oh, okay, so today they're raiding everybody's homes to make a point. So our freedom of speech is endangered. And it's hard to defend this, in my opinion. I see the goal, and I see that they're trying to do it on the legal basis, but I can see how easily it can be used as a boomerang by the right-wingers too.
But do you think in the past that this kind of politics was just not as common because society wasn't as polarized? You didn't have the success of a particular party that engages in this kind of rhetoric, so that personal insult, people are kind of more sensitive about this now. I guess it's sort of the...
I mean, it used to be the opinion free speech cases used to be like what people wrote in like a caricature. Are you allowed to paint a judge like in a cartoon as a pig? Mm-hmm. Or like the example of the TV anchor being called a goat. And this is, I mean, these cases are a joke compared to the complexity of the cases we're faced with now, with share pigs. And like, for example, you're not the one who created a share pig, but you disseminate it. So is this the same level of, or you spread it? Is it the same level of criminal behavior?
I want to ask a question that you didn't really address in the talk, which, I mean, so we've been talking a lot about freedom of speech. There's another very related concept, which is freedom of information. So in other words, as a citizen, what do you expect in a democracy? You expect that you should be able to have access to a diversity or pluralism of views. I think in the American context, one of the things that I've been particularly struck by is clearly the kind of consolidation, and I mentioned this at the beginning, of the media structure. So the fact that TikTok may go to Larry Ellison, and his son Paramount is trying to buy CNN. You have a kind of of the major media outlets, there's a kind of consolidation all in one kind of viewpoint. And so I think a concern in a democracy is, are you getting a range of views and being able to kind of decipher the different sources of information and different views and so on. So that's less driven, I mean, that may be driven by freedom of speech laws, but it's also a kind of political economy question. I mean, the kind of political economy of mergers of media companies and so on. So I'm wondering in the German context, do you have similar concerns at all, or is the media landscape? I know Bertelsmann is a big media company in Germany, but in terms of newspapers, public outlets, do you have a similar concern that there's been a kind of consolidation and a narrowing of viewpoints potentially?
There has been a consolidation, but I think our media landscape is still much more diverse than here, especially when it comes to the not the urban centers, but like the I don't know how you call it, the countryside or the province,
rural areas,
rural areas, and
small towns.
Like the company I'm going to be working for, you mentioned it has regional newspapers that are still doing very well and are quite stable. But when you turn to East Germany, a lot of the papers, like the media companies, have consolidated, so there might be just one owner for 3 regional papers in an East German state. But still, I think the situation in Germany is better for now because we have a large public broadcasting system that, in my opinion, works on quite high level, but it's under huge pressure for political reasons too, because similarly, like with Harvard, although I don't want to compare the ARD to Harvard, but it's still like the criticism comes from the same perspective, saying you guys are all left-wingers, there's no diversity of opinion, the comments on political issues are all from like a left-wing perspective, and so they are very much under pressure to be more diverse, which is, I think, a difficult demand if you talk about covering a certain event. I mean, if you tell a journalist, like, cover it in a more conservative way, it's like, I don't know, I cover it the way I perceive it. So I go into this profession, and I chose this profession because I want to report what I see and what I think is the right way to report about it. And so,
but do you
you cannot set quotas for reporting.
I want to open it up in a moment here, but just one last question on this. I mean, how secure do you think the public media structures are at this point? I mean, one of the things that I've always thought that the genius, if I understand this correctly, the genius of the system is that these are organized at the regional level, but they don't correspond to the state governments. They cut across regions. So it's not as if a minister of culture comes into power in one state that's, let's say, AfD, and wants to go after the media structures, they can't really directly go after them because they cut across state boundaries.
Yes and no.
Does that protect them, or is that?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I mean, what is true is that it's actually very, as everything in Germany, a federal system. But every state government can theoretically, aufkündigen or slash the.
So reduce the contributions or whatever.
No, can step out of the contract it has with the state media system.
Yeah.
And that would mean that the system starts to shake and eventually break down.
Yeah.
And we have 2 elections in East German states coming up next year. And in one, in Saxony-Anhalt, the AfD is looking to maybe even gain an absolute majority. So they could enter the government alone without a coalition partner, and then they could slash the public funding. They wouldn't be able to totally abolish it. They would have to renegotiate the contract, and the Constitutional Court has made it sure that, like, you cannot completely abolish the system, but they would get much less money probably, and they would try to control it much more severely if it's politically diverse.
And this is something that's on their
and
agenda.
fair.
This is something that's on their agenda.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's one of the top priorities.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's open it up. If you're interested in asking a question, please raise your hand, and please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm David Spreen. I'm an assistant professor of history here at Harvard. First of all, thank you for this. It's really interesting to see how this works from your perspective. I have a question about this sort of reflection about the possibility of serious abuse of the limitation of free speech now that there's a real chance of the AfD eventually being part of a government. The sort of irony to me is that when these laws were enshrined, they were enshrined in a country that had very few committed Democrats. Many anti-communists and Germans needed money, so democracy still kind of worked. But of course, there was actually very little threat of a resurgence of Nazism in Germany because it was a country, well, at least in the West, well, and the East, because it was countries under occupation. Now, though, there's a real chance that the far right takes over the state apparatus. And I guess in the US, we talk about the sort of, the line is every accusation is a confession. Of course, all the things that the right has accused institutions like Harvard, the press, etc. of, is exactly what they are trying to do. Also, just as an aside, Vance does not have a point because he knows nothing about the intricacies of German law, and actually is very much, complicit in the erosion of free speech. But yes, that's just an aside. But is there a sort of reflection about this? What happens with these laws and with these precedents when there is actually a right-wing government that has no interest in protecting democracy?
I mean, there is no public debate about, especially on the point of the legal framework for freedom of speech, but of course, as you can see, I mean, Björn Höcke was not that far away from becoming a prime minister in Thuringia, and you saw the picture that he posted, which is like, I mean, you know what, teaching a class on the Weimar Republic, you know what like this imagery reminds you of the parasite journalist clinging to the politician's leg. And so obviously once they're in power and the prosecutions are a political government authority, so they're under political surveillance or under political guidance and control, and of course there's a risk things might turn around. And it's at the same time, AfD politicians profit from the special protection of the legal system. So they're both immunized to a large extent against attacks, and at the same time they could actively use this against political opponents. And there's definitely a danger there.
And I think one point to follow up on this, I mean, this is the biggest threat is at the state level, where the AfD can make its greatest inroads, and that has impact on the structure of, let's say, public media, for instance. And so that's where the threat comes, I think, is sort of from below in a certain way. Thank you. Yeah, so please raise your hand, and I'll sort of begin to keep track of those Paris. Keep your hand up if you could for a moment, just so go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Paris. I'm a PhD student here, and before starting the PhD, I wanted to be a journalist at one point. So
what went wrong?
I have no idea. But yeah, from what you said during the lecture portion, it seems like politicians, let's say a politician says something X about another politician, and then a non-politician says exactly the same thing. It seems like when there's the same level of ambiguity in the substance of that, what has been said, politicians are guaranteed a little bit more leeway in terms of legal prosecution.
When they're in Parliament, speaking in Parliament, then they're whatever they say is largely protected. But if they go to a market square and give a speech there attacking their opponent, that's something completely different. So it's mainly in Parliament that the parliamentary debates that are protected. Maybe I didn't make that clear enough.
Okay, no, now I understand. Just then, I guess my question is, when the courts or the judiciary do decide to sort of prosecute politicians, do you think that they're largely insulated from public opinion or sort of politicized judgment? Because obviously in the case of the US, the Supreme Court is by nature and design a little bit politicized easily. What is your intuition on that?
My impression is that our federal constitutional court is not very politicized. I think it's still an institution of, I didn't want to say nerds, but law, like scholarly minds and experts who quite soberly...
Nerds,
Not meant as an insult. So luckily, I think although we had the case that like one judge that was supposed to be elected to the court, like the election failed, or there was a big political right-wing campaign against this person. So for the first time, the election of federal constitutional court judges has been politicized like this year. It was quite a big scandal, and this woman, she was accused of being a socialist. It sounded very American, like a pro-abortionist, like somebody wanted to loosen the abortion laws, and so this right-wing news portal tried to, they put pressure on conservative members of parliament, like not to vote for this woman. So it's starting now to become more politicized who becomes a member of this institution.
I mean, the way that this was politicized through this non-traditional news outlet is very revealing, though, because it did seem the whole process seemed very American, I would say, and not particularly German. But that does suggest, again, if this happens more, I mean, this is...
Ultimately, we take on every trend that you guys come up with over here, like be it in movies or in law. I'm afraid, or in politics.
What's the name of this publication again?
News, NYUS.
Okay, very good. Ben? Ben Friedman.
Ben Friedman, Economics Department. Nice to see you again. Thank you for the interesting talk. What struck me most about your remarks is the way you portray the debate in Germany as being principled. Not principled in the sense that everybody behaves himself or herself, but being about principle. And to an American, this seems not relevant here. I'm going to make an assertion. Others may disagree, but I'm going to make an assertion about the U.S. and then ask you to respond in Germany. Here, the debate has nothing to do with principle. On one side, you have people like Trump and Vance can talk about their dedication to free speech, but Trump has multi-billion-dollar suits against the New York Times, against the Wall Street Journal, against the Washington Post, and absurdly small level against the Pulitzer Prize Board. Hate speech is terrific, but any speech leveled against Charlie Kirk is completely ground for prosecution. So there's nothing principled about this. It's that whatever speech serves the interests of Trump and associates is in their eyes good, and whatever speech does not serve that interest is to be prohibited. But the same thing applies on the other side as well. Here at Harvard, for example, you use the river to the sea analogy. The exact same people who are most exercised about freedom of speech in that context today were 2.5 years ago the same people who were telling us and enforcing what you might call political correctness, of what professors are allowed to say in classrooms, enforcing punishments on professors because some anonymous student complained that he or she was offended by what the professor said in the classroom, warning people about microaggressions. This is not the place to go into examples, but it's clear that none of this in the United States has anything to do with anybody's view about principle. It's all about what serves my interest, what serves somebody else's interest. And so what struck me, to repeat, is especially interesting is your portrayal of the German debate is one about principle. And am I reading you correctly? And if so, do you think that's a temporary phase and it will give way to the kind of raw self-interest applied here, applied in Germany as it is here? What accounts for this?
Yeah. I think what you described is already happening definitely within the AfD. So this is, their idea of freedom of speech is pretty much what I observe here in the political sphere. But they're only a segment of the system in Germany, and they're not in power anywhere. So luckily, the way I perceive it, the other parties and the other politicians are indeed following principles and try to uphold principles and do not use the law as a weapon against political opponents. But I used to cover AfD, and they select the people who are invited to their party conference. They keep journalists out. They are very. I'm sure if they were in power, they would also try, like Trump tries to keep reporters out the Oval Office who he doesn't like, or similar cases. You would see the same in German government. And I think another big difference is that, I've heard so many statements since I've come here that, like in the political scene in Germany, like if you said something like this on a podium, like people would laugh at you and throw you out. Like if somebody said, this government is the best government in the world. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, get out of here. So there's still like kind of a level of sanity that we have, and I think, and I hope we can safeguard it. And statements that I've heard here, not like at Harvard, but in general in the political debate by government officials, like they would not be seriously made by German government officials, or there would be severe pushback if they were uttered in Germany. But like you said, it might just be the dusk of our civilization. I don't know. I mean, eventually, I mean, the AfD is on the rise. It's already the biggest opposition party, and the other parties are struggling with coming up with like a plan how to promote themselves. I said it in a different circle last night. I mean, they don't come up with ideas how to attract voters to themselves. They mainly come up with ideas how to reject the AfD. So it's like you don't have to combat the others, like try to get people to come to you. And as long as they don't, and they don't seem to do that, and they don't have a strategy for that. And as long as that doesn't work, I think AfD will rise and rise. And
I mean, Professor, I would just follow up on Professor Friedman's point. I mean, I think there's one. I mean, it's clearly politicians instrumentally feigning outrage for whatever purpose, and that's, I think, what you're describing. But I also think there, I mean, what part of the reason it works is, I mean, maybe the degree of polarization. I mean, what people call motivated reasoning, where they really do see violations on one side and not the other, and people are blinded to it because of deep levels of polarization and thinking that their side is right and the other side is wrong. And so I think, maybe part of what you're describing is the term people have often used to describe this is a kind of asymmetric polarization where one side radicalizes before the other. But I think what we've discovered in the United States to some degree is that polarization is kind of contagious. And that once one side polarizes, then the other side begins to polarize, and both sides begin to view each other through this lens. So I think that's part of what's happening. Okay, so we have a bunch more questions. So yes, right. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm studying at the Kennedy School, a Master of Public Policy as well. And you were talking about protecting freedom of expression by taking a tough action against unlawful expression. And I would want to see your views on taking that to democracy and democratic parties. So taking, protecting democracy by taking a tough stance against undemocratic actors such as the AfD by prohibiting them. So what would you say about that argument or drawing the lines?
Well, we do have, other than the United States, I think, theoretically, there's a possibility to prohibit a political party that is anti-democratic, but it needs to aggressively attack democracy, and it's not enough to have unconstitutional behavior, so to say, or viewpoints. And I'm very skeptical that this procedure would work, and what I think they should do is try it on a state level. I mean, the AfD in East Germany, in the East German states, is so obviously and so aggressively right-wing extremist, bordering on neo-Nazi ideology, that I think it would be easier to start on a small level and see what can you achieve there, and instead of taking down the whole, or wanting to take down the whole political party as such. And of course the impression of the public is, okay, they can't beat them politically, so now they try to attack them with legal measures. And I think that's a very unhealthy way to go, especially if the outcome is so uncertain. So I'm rather skeptical. I would rather not pursue this at the moment.
There's another dimension to it, and just the dimensions for freedoms of speech.
Well, I think in that case, the problem is that you try to measure them against things that, what would they potentially do and what are they doing? And they are not in power, so it's basically you accuse them of, they would undermine democracy or they would destroy democracy if they were in power, so we have to forbid them. But before they're in power, it stands to prove that they will actually do this. So you have to go through their party manifesto, and you have to check out all the speeches, and they have become cautious. They have learned to be careful, and it's difficult to. I think it might be a losing battle.
Yes.
Mara Ferry, I'm a retired sociologist, and did some years ago part of a large comparative study of media in Germany and the U.S. On abortion discourse. And one of the things that we found was that American journalists fell very easily into polarized kinds of tropes where balance equals two sides. And if you can give two sides on anything, regardless of who those two sides are, then you have a balanced story. And there are two and only two perspectives. Consequently, there was much less coverage in the US around abortion of what would be the consequences of various laws, and much more about how far along was it towards getting there. What I see, Germany instead, the discourse was much more spread across multiple parties, and therefore there wasn't a single place. In fact, there was a pretty good representation of column inches for share of the vote that the parties got. So minor parties got less, of course, but everybody got some. So that there was indeed some discourse, and it was discourse mostly driven by expert opinion, not by court cases and not by horse race. I'm struck now looking at the German press, the extent to which the press habits or notions of fairness have become Americanized to the detriment of freedom of speech. So much more polarized. It's us versus them. They are the threat. There's only two sides to this story. Either you are for democracy or you are for the AfD, and it's one or the other. And much less reliance on the kind of sober expert, what kind of threat or what kind of something is actually happening here, and much more engaging in horse race discussions about. I've heard more about the AfD and how well it is doing in various races than about what it has proposed doing substantively in this state or that state or the other state. And so I'm wondering to what extent the freedom issue is really tied to journalistic norms, not just to state law, and how journalists sustain or lose a real freedom of speech with this polarization process.
Definitely. I mean, that's definitely a point that we take seriously, or I take seriously, and we have made mistakes that have contributed to the rise of AfD, no question. And I think one thing that I witness within our craft is we've started attacking each other. So there are media outlets that have made it a business model to present an opinion that is outside the mainstream, even though they are mainstream publications. Like you would have an Axel Springer publication like Die Welt, who would tell you, like, in our publication you only find opinions that you find nowhere else. And I mean, yeah, they're not that original. I mean, you find them in the FAZ or in other publications as well, but some columnists make it their, like, try to make it their platform that they will only publish, or they judge every political topic according to, like, what are the others saying, and I'll be against it. And that's a very destructive way of, and they also point out, like, every time the public broadcasting system is, like, what feels like 3 million reporters are making a mistake, like, for example, interviewing someone who actually works for them, but they didn't know that this person worked for them. And so this is, like, scandalized. And this is used against this is used to delegitimize the whole system as such. And we had a recent case, I don't know if you guys followed it, but there's a young reporter who works for our national broadcasting system, or for the Bavarian broadcasting system, and she made it her career, the kind of strategy of her career, to present herself as a conservative voice, where everybody else in the public radio is left-wing, so she's the conservative one. And out of fear to be, like, not to give enough opinions a voice, this woman got her own show, and the show was so bad, or like a series of documentaries she did, and so one public broadcaster decided to pull out of it because they thought this is bad reporting what she's doing, and now they're being criticized even by legitimate politicians, saying like, oh, see, they silenced the one conservative voice that they had, but she was basically just doing bad journalism. So she uses the idea that public broadcasters are left-wing biased in a left-wing way. So she says, I'm biased as a conservative, so take me. And I'm a better journalist because I'm biased, but I'm conservative. So this kind of system, and there's a huge public debate going on, why is this woman being silenced? And you have heads of state saying like, you put her back on screen, she needs her show, to have her show back, and everybody's like, this show is terrible and it's really bad. But still, it's being used or exploited by conservatives to say, like, we need in order to have a political balance, this woman has a right to TV appearances, and it's crazy. So we contribute to it ourselves, or like the system destroys itself in a way.
Yeah, so when you said you contributed to the rise of the, I mean, you didn't quite say it this way, but that there were mistakes that you made, or not you personally, but media.
Yeah, me personally as
Yes,
well. I mean,
yeah.
I
So
covered AfD.
what are some of those?
I covered AfD when they started, when they were quite a moderate right-wing movement, but they were not extremists. They were maybe a bit populist, but they were not. But I think I was always looking for the Nazis. I was looking for like, where are the right-wing extremists? And I was very strict when I found a few, and so I kept bashing them. And maybe sometimes, I mean, I thought maybe in 80-90% of the cases I was right, but maybe the other cases where I was overreacting may have contributed to this mentality that like we have to stick together, and they were pushing people out who were considered like too modest or too media friendly, and because people like me were so critical of them, they kind of held together against the media and radicalized even further. So,
but is there any evidence of any journalists in Germany not taking the strategy that you took, and this not having a poll? I mean,
there are some right-wing papers.
But, and has that made them less? Has that made the AfD less extremist? I mean, I guess I'm coming to your own defense of your
defend
reporting.
me, please defend me.
I don't know. Yeah,
I'm sure I'm wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wrong about being wrong.
One other question. There's other questions people have, but what do you take as now having spent, several weeks here and a month here, when you go back to Germany, what are the warnings? I mean, you're sort of, as you said, what happens here, happens here first and maybe comes to Germany. What's the message, the warning that you're going to bring back to your colleagues to say, we need to watch out for this, and this is something that we can do something about? Is there anything, both in your world of journalism, but just more generally?
I mean, things have progressed so far here that it's hard to say, like, I think.
But are there kind of actionable kinds of things where you sort of say, well, actually, I see what the U.S. has done. They've made some wrong choices.
Yeah, I think this idea of, like, what I'm witnessing here, this idea of maintaining a diversity of opinion, like to the extent that there's no counter speech against absurdities, or absurd remarks and outrageous ideas, and that they're simply being accepted and.
So it's not allowing them, but just having no actual debate.
I think you need to be able to say what's obviously wrong, right, or biased, or not based on facts, or like ideological. Or if it's an ideological statement, then it should be marked as such and contradicted as such. And I feel this insecurity at Harvard. I feel there's an enormous sense of nervousness, and people are just letting certain conservatives talk, whatever they say, and you're sitting there and thinking, like, did he really just say this?
Without a response?
Without a response, without anyone contradicting him or her, or him mostly in my case, from what I heard. And it's, what do I learn from this? But I've been telling this my our Spiegel newsroom as well. I think we have to keep in mind who we're working for. Like we're working for our audience, and they pay us because they believe that we're doing good reporting. So let's report for these people, and let's not be deterred, or let's not always focus on if we help some right-wing agenda by reporting about a certain topic, or we should never base a decision to report about what effect it might have on the AfD. So let's make sure we do good journalism and not and not worry about the sounds that are all around it. You know, this
Right.
kind of white noise. That is,
And there is a
that's
sense of
happening
people sort of afraid of their own shadow in a
there.
certain
Yeah, there's a
way.
lot
Right,
of
yeah,
insecurity
yeah.
going on, and also focus on the really relevant things. I think you said that too. There's been a debate this week. Friedrich Merz said, I don't know if you guys followed it, but he said like, oh, in Germany, we've started good work on the migration policy, but we still have trouble. Like if you look into our cities, like the way our cities look, and the Stadtbild was like the word he used. The way our cities look, I still don't like it, and people don't like it, and we have to do something about it. And nobody really knew, okay, what does he mean? It was a bit like kind of a dog whistling thing, you know, like too many brown-skinned people on the street, but I'm not saying it. And
Right.
and he was asked, so how do you mean this? And he was like, yeah, do you have daughters? Ask your daughters what they think. And I was like, okay. As a politician, I mean, and then, so of course, the media has been reporting about this, and it has been reported like, should Merz be allowed to say this? Is it an outrage or is it not? And what was the reaction? What are people commenting on it? And instead, I mean, we should just move on and just ignore this kind of thing, or demand certain. I mean, I didn't hear a journalist ask him, could you please say exactly what the problem is? Because if you don't say it, we're not going to take it seriously. And if you see a problem, what's your response to it? And so the coverage is kind of
Sort of meta.
meta, superficial, meta, but superficial. And this is something, and this happens all the time. There's like one incident after the next where we kind of report about nonsensical, like a blur. It's like a blurry substance that you try to get a grip on it, and it goes through your hands. And the only effect it has is that AfD says, "We told you." Yeah. So now they're coming around. He finally gets it. And
Right. So we have quite a few hands. So given that we
think
only
this-
have 15 minutes left, what I'd like to do is collect a couple of questions, and then you can respond. So Carl, I think, yeah, you had one. So you go, and let's try to get through the questions kind of quickly. And I see.
Yeah, my question was, you showed us an example for dialogue between J.D. Vance and the AfD happening on Twitter. How much do you think does the AfD benefit from this legitimization from the US right now?
Great question, but let's get a couple more.
Hi, Laura. I'm at HBS at the Business Government and International Economy Unit. I've been really stuck on this idea of principledness and how do we have a more principled approach here. And I've just been wondering, like, what you can explain here about, like, learning over time from these raids, and like what actually has consequences versus not, in terms of finding threatening material or someone who might actually be ready for violence versus someone who just is expressing an insult online, and sort of like, is there a more scientific approach you think we could or should take over time for this, where we actually kind of see this as a feedback of this is a case that clearly should have tipped us off based on the language or sort of the context of the comment, versus these are types of comments now we can sort of downgrade in how seriously we take it, given that they've never led to a prosecution or given that they've never led to any kind of smoking gun evidence, so to speak. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
So we're getting lots of great questions in the last 10 minutes, unfortunately. So, fortunately. Okay, great. Actually, let me first go behind Paul Tucker.
One criticism of First Amendment jurisprudence in the United States is that it allows misinformation. Is that landscape materially better in Germany as a result of a different you don't call it First Amendment, but a different speech jurisprudence?
I don't understand.
So ask the question again. Yeah.
A lot of people complain that the First Amendment allows the flowing of inaccurate information, what some people call misinformation, disinformation, and it's plagued this environment such that it's even caused democratic backsliding in the United States. Germany has a much more restrictive flow of information. Has that led to less inaccurate information as a result?
Great. So why don't we start with these three, and then we'll get one more round. So yeah.
Okay, so
You don't have to answer
interesting.
all. Just answer what you want. And this is
Okay.
this is not an exam, but yeah.
Well, that's a question of my personal honor and vanity
Yes.
to answer them all.
Okay.
As for the influence of, there was a very visible dialogue that Elon Musk had with Alice Weidel. They had this online chat for an hour or over an hour, I think. And when this was announced, I thought, okay, that's it. They're going to be the strongest party, and are they going to be stronger than CDU because this is such a highly visible event, and this will upgrade them in a way or legitimize them in a way that that was unthinkable before, and it didn't happen. So I think what played into this was that many people in the AfD community have a very strong anti-American vibe. So there's like traditionally they're pro-Russian, or at least anti-American. They are also very much anti-NATO, like way before the whole Ukraine thing, but the Ukraine war. And so for them, it's been very hard to wrap their head around, okay, so now they have a government in the US that they like, but the US are still the US, so they're still kind of bad, and we don't like them. So, and then there is a lot of, like, anti-Semitic thinking, or it has connotations to like this Wall Street capitalism, and like you have a tech billionaire entrepreneur like Elon Musk, and many Germans, especially in East Germany, distrust a person like this. And so I think it kind of balances out. I mean, there might be people who were attracted to AfD because of Weidel's connection with Musk, and at the same time there were people who were offended by it and were anti-Trump or anti-US in a broader sense. So yeah, it's a win-lose. It's equal. How do you say? It's balanced in the end. And yes, as for Laura, I think it's really I think it's already happening that the prosecutors on different on the state level exchange their ideas and experiences and there are actually what we call Richtlinien, like guidelines for the prosecutors, like what are and how to act in which cases. And I just think they haven't all been updated, and they haven't been balanced like among the states. Like there's a little exchange of experience and standards between the prosecutors. I think we will see much more scientific, like scientists looking into this, like legal scholars looking into this. I think the problem is right now we don't have any data or statistics, like I said, at work, but I mean, the case numbers are there. It would just take someone to really start collecting everything and updating everything. And I think, I'm sure that there are like PhD theses in the works, or and there are NGOs trying to look into the cases. I can give you some names later, but it's spotty, and you don't really know.
And misinformation, does Germany deal with misinformation better because of these restrictions that you've
Well,
described?
no, because I mean, the right to information is also safeguarded by the Constitution in the same article as freedom of speech. It's also freedom of information. And we have media, how do you say, agencies for the supervision of media to ensure the reliability of information, which already is kind of a problem, because how do you separate these, or how do you make sure these agencies are politically unbiased? So I think what we've mainly seen is German security services combating attempts from Russia to disseminate disinformation. And they have been only moderately successful, I would say. There have been arrests made, or there have been like monitoring of social media content, and we've seen interior ministries post things on X, for example, this is wrong information, this didn't happen. Or do you see, like there was for example, when there were attacks by refugees, like somebody stabbing people on the street, then often you have accounts, anonymous accounts, or with huge followings, like spreading disinformation about who the assassin was, or that he was a refugee when in fact he wasn't. And then you will have security services posting things, don't believe it, this is wrong, and this is, and like putting a red cross through it. But yeah, it's very spotty and very limited.
Okay, so I saw a couple of hands, and we may not get to everybody, but first, you, yes.
Asaf from the MDE program. In the context of enforcing the laws of speech in the digital dimension, what would be a counter argument for people who advocate that this is essentially developing a sovereign surveillance tool?
Okay, so that's one. In the far back.
Yeah, hi, my name is Freya Haas. I'm an LLM student from Sweden. I just have a question, because in Sweden there has been a lot of debate about scientists not daring to publish in certain topics, or journalists. We also have recently, just last week, a female politician that resigned as party leader for the Center Party just after 5 months because she had so much hate directed towards her. And also there's research that shows that women don't dare to speak because they're afraid of their response. What is your reaction to more moderation to actually give people that are not in power their right to free speech?
So I'm going to give one more, but it's going to only give you 2 minutes to answer all the questions, I'm sorry to say, but Paul.
Thank you. Paul Tucker, Kennedy School. I was going to ask a question about misrepresentation, but leading into beyond misrepresentation, what about delegitimation? So we had the Daily Mail, which is the most powerful newspaper in Britain, describe our Supreme Court after a particular decision as enemies of the people. And that's not insult, nor is it misrepresentation. But somehow it's quite hard to outlaw delegitimating speech and media coverage, and yet it's the most potent thing of all in terms of undermining the fabric. I mean, your constitutional court stands very high indeed, but it couldn't withstand a sustained media campaign to undermine it. Are there any barriers to that kind of campaign in German law?
And so for those of you who I didn't call on, we can come up afterwards maybe and ask some questions. I apologize to you, but give you the last word here.
I'm not sure, but I think attacks like that might actually be liable under the German law. Like attacking a court as being an enemy of the people. I mean, or a federal court judge as an enemy of the people. I mean, I don't know, maybe Christian is an expert on freedom of speech in Germany. Maybe he could tell you more about this, but I think this might be, actually there might be ways to work against this. And so how to work against the narrative that there's a surveillance system installed? I mean, basically, the prosecutors in the CBS thing, of course, did a horrible job presenting their work, but
60 Minutes did a good job in making them look ridiculous. I think it's part of it.
They did.
That's part
and
of
I mean,
their-
they reported it correctly because
Yeah.
this is what these people said. They're
Right.
just not, I don't know. Probably the media spokesperson of the Staatsanwaltschaft threw herself off a bridge after that. I don't know. This is really bad. But I mean, in general, my impression is that our courts and I have a few friends who are court spokespeople. And there are associations like the Association of Judges in Germany and Association of Prosecutors, and they always try to stress hate is not a legitimate opinion according to German law, and we only prosecute cases that are unlawful. And I mean, they try to counter these allegations, but I think they are out there, and it's impossible to completely work against them. I think what would be important if politicians try to be more moderate themselves, or if they try to support the legal system or show more respect to the legal system, but they don't so far. So, and as for, I'm not sure I got your question right. Is the question what should we do to give these weaker people a stance, or how to
If, for
protect them
example,
better?
journalists or women or minority groups, because I think at the moment you just talk about freedom of speech, and then should be restricted and how much. But just some people exercising their freedom of speech has consequences for other people's opportunity to actually exercise their freedom.
Yeah.
What do you think about that sort of concept?
It's absolutely right. I mean, it is, like I said, the goal of this legislation is to make sure that people have the courage or feel safe speaking out. And that's not happening. That part of the law doesn't work, I think. So, I mean, I'm quite thick-skinned, but I've basically pulled back from platforms like X I'm not posting things there anymore. It's just useless. And Instagram too, actually. So imagine you're someone who's not used to being in the public light, and I don't know how to change this, honestly. I think there's no way unless the platforms act on it, and they don't care, is my impression, or they don't. I mean, that's not the way for them to make money, and so.
So, I think we've learned a lot about Germany, but, I study comparative politics, and I think we've also learned a lot about the United States through this conversation, so really grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.